So using the template that I've provided with the assignment, you're now going to start to practice playing with the metronome. This is something that musicians do all the time to work on improving their timing and their accuracy with their rhythms. So the first thing you should do is click on this little picture of the drum, and you'll see the diagram of a drum set show up here at the bottom. And you should have your MIDI controller set up so you can play the kick drum using that first white key on the left end of the MIDI controller. Now, if you hit the space bar on your computer keyboard, you should hear the metronome clicking. So what you should do first is practice playing the kick drum on counts 1 and 3, like this. 1, 3, 1, 3, 1, 3, 1, 3, 1, 3, 1, 3. Now, when you think you've gotten pretty good at that, then it's time to record. When you hit the record button, you'll see what's called a count in, where they'll give you 4 counts before the recording starts. So here's the click record. There's my count in. 1, 3. Now when I get to the end, I'll hit my space bar to stop the recording. Now, to see how accurate you were able to play, take your mouse and come over here and click on this button that says piano roll. Now, on the piano roll, what I see is a close-up version of my timeline, where you see these vertical lines in this grid that line up with the beats in the timeline. And if I look at this closely, or even zoom in, I can see places where I'm not quite lined up with the grid line. You can see here I played a little bit in front of the line. I was a little early here. These were good. These are pretty good. And then towards the end, you can see where I wasn't lined up. Okay, so if you want to try and do this again, you can simply click on the region and hit your delete button. Press your return key to get your playhead back to the beginning. I'll go back to my instrument and I'll try to record again. 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. So again, I can click on the piano roll and take another look and see how I did. And with this one, I got pretty close. So once I get my kick drum on counts 1 and 3, then I can switch back over to my snare drum, which is going to be the second white key on your MIDI controller. And with that, I'm going to try to record that on counts 2 and 4. And I'm going to record that right on top of my kick drum. So again, I'm going to click the record button. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 1. Now it's recorded both parts together. Again, I can click on the piano roll and I can come look at my snare drum to see how accurate I was. So you can see in this measure, I'm not lining up with the grid. This measure is pretty good. This one's a little off. Now, one of the things about this view that's pretty cool is that where I've not quite lined up with the grid, I can actually adjust those notes simply by clicking on it and dragging it. to make sure that I'm lined up with the grid. Now, the more accurately I'm able to play, the less adjusting I have to do. So the best thing I can do is to try to play it really accurately the first time. So now, when I go back and listen to it, okay. Now the other thing you might notice is that the lengths of the notes are not all the same. So after I line up the beginning of the note, I can also work on lining up the length of the note. And I can do that just by clicking on the end of that little block and adjusting the lengths of the notes so that my note lengths all match, or at least they're pretty close to matching. So that's starting to look a lot more uniform. Now, once you feel like you've done this pretty successfully, the next step is to actually record the kick drum and the snare drum at the same time. So I'm going to mute this track by clicking the mute button. I'm going to add a new track, and I'm going to select drum and beats. I'm going to click on instrument, get my playhead here back at the beginning. So again, I can practice before I record. So I hear the metronome and playing my kick drum and snare drum together like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So when I feel like I'm ready to do that, again, I'll hit record. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then I hit my space bar when I'm finished. Again, I can click on the piano roll. If I need to zoom in, I can use my zoom controls over here and check my accuracy, adjust anything that needs to be adjusted. To make sure everything's lined up with my timeline grid. You can see as I do two sounds at the same time, it's a little more difficult to get everything lined up. But I can come in and just by click and drag and adjust. Now if I go back and listen, and I noticed that one right there was a little bit off, so I just adjust. Now, once you do this, I can add another part. Let's say I want to add a cymbal sound. So first, I'm just going to hit the space bar to practice. So once I feel like I'm ready to do that, I can record my cymbal part. click on piano roll, I can zoom in and see how accurate I was, making adjustments anywhere that I see notes that aren't lined up with the grid. There's a few. So I want to be as accurate as possible. Okay, so that's what you're going to be working on today, is just practicing playing with the metronome and then beginning to record some drum patterns using your MIDI controller.